I want to make a show that's going to have people who are very important to the arts in the last century. And some of them are still important to the arts in this century. But I was afraid that people who were moving to Atlanta or young people would not know who they were. So this is how this show began. And if you read the catalog, you'll hear this explained a little bit more, and also a little bit more about each of the individual sculptures. But right now I want to turn it over to Jerry, and I'm going to ask him how you got started.
I got started with my part of the portrait project just because I love photographing people. And I think that comes from liking to talk to people and finding out what they're about. The first portraits I shot were shot just of friends that happened to be artists. I shot a writer who was a really great friend who was, I think, 41 years older than I am, who became my best friend, and she and I and a painter would always sit around and hang out together and go on walks, and they really encouraged what I was doing. And I photographed both of them. I photographed another artist from Selma, and they were both important Southern artists. And then I photographed Bill Allen at the Georgia Museum of Art commissioned me to photograph Lamar Dodd for a book that he was doing. And he had seen those three portraits, and one I did of Charles Shannon, who is the guy who brought us all the Bill Traylor folk art. And after seeing that, he said, "You really have a really neat series going of late career Southern artists, and I think you should pursue it." And that's really all it took. And through connections, I met a gallerist in New Orleans who connected me with Ada Kohlmeyer and George Thoreau and George Dunbar, all the heroes of Louisiana art. And that was the genesis of it.
Well, and because of your book, Facing South, which is a fabulous book, but a lot of the pictures that are here are in that book, when I was making these portraits, I would use Jerry's book to help me with some of, I had my own snapshots and other pictures, but Jerry had captured these people with such care and in such a unique way that I thought, well, this would be great to bring Jerry in on this and let his photographs and my work be paired. And then Annette thought it was such a great idea, and she already had all these wonderful photographs that had been given by the Massey Charitable Trust, I believe. And to add to that, and then to have the actual work by these people, I think this was extremely exciting.
It really is. It really gives you a full scope of two different artists' work, plus however many, 35, 40 people's work.
Well, one of the things I think we were talking about the other day, trying to get pumped up about this, was I mentioned that David Heath was done in 1987. And your earliest one was done
1994. So we've both been
persevering,
yeah. And these are not short-term projects that were taken on and run through.
Yeah,
and I think we both feel like they are continuing and will continue.
I think so. It's too much fun.
It is fun. I have no desire to stop.
No, me either. Well, one of the things that we were talking about the other day that I wanted to ask Jerry about was because when I first met him, it was to take the portraits to him to be photographed because he was doing commercial work, and so I needed to have them photographed, documented, and so I went there. And you had a lot of folk art on the walls, and you weren't talking so much about being an artist yourself, but you were just getting into it. You were doing this commercially, and you were pushing at the edges to become the artist that you truly are now.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I never thought about actually exhibiting work and being an artist until I met a lady named Marcia Cavalier, and she saw some pictures that I'd done of dolls and suggested I do a show. I'd been working on the artist project and always used to say to anybody I met, well, I hope one day there'll be an exhibit in a book. I'm not sure when I was saying that in 94 and 95 and 96, I really honestly felt that, but that was kind of what I had in the back of my head. I enjoyed the experience. I photographed almost 200 artists, and the ability to be able to go into their homes and studios, for them to open up their doors and share with me what they've done has been an amazing experience.
Well, now, I'm going to talk about myself for a minute, if I hadn't already done too much of that. I just wanted to talk about the process, just a little bit about what I'm doing, because it's so different from you with your camera and your light.
Well, I asked you that the other day. How did this come about for you, and how did you decide on this process? Because I've been an admirer of this work since we've been doing the copy shots together, but I first knew of your drawings.
Well, that's right. So I got into this kind of in two different ways. One of the earliest papier-mâché pieces I did was, you remember back in the 60s, everybody was trying to imitate Jackie Kennedy, and so they had hair pieces and wigs and falls, and those things were on top of a wig stand. Remember, that was made out of styrofoam. Well, sometime in the early 70s, I guess it was, I was sitting, maybe it was middle 70s, sitting next to a gentleman I didn't know at a dinner party, and he said something about, well, what is your artwork like? And that was when I was doing drawings. I said, well, it's just kind of like Einstein said about, you know, if he'd only been a good enough mathematician, he could have proved a unified field. And I said, I kind of feel like if I was a good enough artist, I could have proven there was a unified field. Well, he rolled his eyes and he said, well, how much do you actually know about Einstein? And I said, well, that's it. So anyway, about 2 weeks later, I got this tome on Einstein with this kind of snippy note that suggested maybe I better bone up. So I read it. It was very difficult. I'd never had physics or chemistry or much math, so I was struggling, but I was going to read that book. And in the process, I thought, you know, I may not be Einstein, but I can make Einstein. So back to the wig stand. I got the wig stand out and I started putting some papier-mâché stuff on there and gave him a nose and some eyes and hair made out of steel wool, and then I put him on top of some pillows with a sweatshirt on and had Mr. Patillo over for dinner with his wife and opened the door and there was Einstein. So anyway, that was my first portrait. And then, if you don't mind me running on, a woman named Jane Bickerton, who lived in Atlanta and had an art gallery, asked me if I would do a family portrait. And I said, well, I don't really do portraits. That's not my field. And she said, no, I know you can do this. You just need to do it. So I drew her 2 children and her husband, and I took photographs and her, so the 4 of them. And I was right in the beginning of trying to figure out how to do this for somebody. I'm not very much of a painter. And so I was thinking about it when she gave me a call and she said, you know what, this marriage is not going to last. And I said, well, that is really strange to have a family portrait of marriage that's not going to last. And besides that, I've already spent the deposit. And she said, no, go on and do it. So now I mentioned this to Carl, my husband, and he said, well, why don't you get a canvas with a zipper down the middle of it? And I said, no, I'm going to work on something else. So I started thinking of a collage, and so I asked her to give me some things that belonged to the family, and the only thing she gave me was postcards, because he traveled a lot with the CDC, and her family was back in England, and she had a lot of artist friends all over the world. So all of a sudden I thought, I'm going to build her a house. And it's going to be like the house in England where she was from. It had half timbers, so I had half timbers over the postcards. And then you took the roof off. And I had seen that Paul Klee had made puppets. They weren't portraits, but they were puppets. And I thought, I can do that. I can do that. So I made each of them individual with the notion that when he left, he could take himself with him. And she was horrified.
She didn't like it?
She said, "What's this with the house of cards?" But she took it.
Yeah.
But when she moved back after the divorce, she said, "Now what shall I do with the portrait?" And I said, "Well, I don't know what the problem is." And she said, "Well, I don't want to take Tony to England." And I said, "Well, you just put Tony in a box and you just mail Tony to Tony and that'll be it." So anyway, that's how it started.
Well, I think our portraits are, what's similar is that we both shoot portraits and we're both very interested in people and finding out about them. But we do it in a very different way, because when you shoot work on sometimes they're commissioned, sometimes they're people you choose. You do a lot of research in advance and really understand who they are. And I don't always have that luxury. I always try to do some research to find out, if I'm going to shoot Kevin Cole, what his work is about. But it doesn't influence what I'm going to shoot. I never know what I'm going to shoot till I get there. And it depends on what I walk into. So I think we both have that interest in who they are and what they're about, and trying to get that across in the portrait. But you do all the research up front. I do it once I get there, which is,
Yeah.
but we're both storytellers. We're both from the South.
I think that's right. We had talked about that our southernness and the love of storytelling and the narrative, and I think that's one thing we both agree on, that you might be able to see for yourself that we have in common, is that we want those works to tell a story.
Now, I don't know if you can tell everything in a portrait, but I've been lucky enough to see the unveiling of a handful of the three-dimensional portraits, and Susan does a great job of explaining what each element means and how she got there, and it's really fascinating. And so look at the catalog, because it'll even tell you more. It's you can't tell everything in a photograph, but you can at least give an idea of what people are about, and the environment is the best way. I do it by putting them in their environment. You do it by creating the environment.
One thing I don't understand how you do, but fascinates me from studying those photographs, is that you really know how to capture somebody's eyes in a way that gives them, their spirit comes out. And I don't know, what's your secret? How do you do that?
Drug them. No, I think the most important thing is if they're relaxed and comfortable, then you will find they will give you their real, I don't know if it's their real self, but the nicest things that I've always heard when I shoot portraits, whether I'm shooting a commission and I shot a 1-year-old in their christening gown, and the mother said to me, "That's exactly the way I see Whit every day." Or when I shot Jerry Cullum, and I was talking to some friends of his, and I don't know Jerry very well, and it was probably the shortest portrait I ever did. It was less than 10 minutes. But they said, somehow you managed to capture him exactly the way we know him. And I think it's probably just the way that I was raised in a very social environment. I probably consider myself an introvert, but I'm good one-on-one. And I like to hear what people have to say, and if you let them talk and get them to feel comfortable, then they'll find that comfortable position. And I have found that in the commercial work as well, where I'll shoot a CEO and they're very stiff and they're very formal, and you start talking about golf, or they finally get bored and go. And I learned that you say, wait, don't move. But you have to find that place where they finally just lean back into it and become who they are, and that's how you get that genuine sort of feel.
The other thing you're really good at is light. I think you managed to know exactly how to capture the light. So how do you do that?
Almost every portrait that you see and hear, I'm trying to think back other than the early picture of Angela West, which was really not shot as part of the artist series, but it got thrown in because she was part of the collection, and I think it shows a different side of my portraiture. But out of 100 portraits in the book, I think there were only about 8 that I used artificial light, or window. So I always try to work with what's available, because you can't beat natural light. I love to shoot on flat days, gray days when I'm outside, but you just can't beat God's light. I mean, I've tried for years and years in the studio all kind of things to recreate window light, and I can get a really pretty light, but it's not the same as the actual, or in the case of Ruth Laxon in The Door. But I had a great mentor, and he was a great technical photographer, and he understood light, so I learned to see it. And I think that's the one thing you learn is
that something you get trained to do?
Yes, absolutely. And I think probably photographers have been shooting longer and started with film understand that more so.
Yeah.
Because you have to, in the old days of film, you didn't get to look on the camera and see if it was working. So you had to see the light, know your exposure, know what you were getting, but you had to see the light in advance,
Yeah.
So I see you, I can see where the light's hitting you and where the shadows are, and I see, and you're constantly looking for that.
And do people like your photographs?
Everybody but one person.
Well, that's where he's really talented, because I hadn't had such good luck.
Well,
People don't always like mine. I
don't know if everybody does, but I've only had one person that called me names, and we really disagreed a lot.
Oh, good, a question.
Yes.
Oh, great. Go for it.
I'm glad you spoke about light, because it seems to me that light is everything art. It's just
Speak into this, but you have to eat it like an ice cream.
No, excuse me, but I was just thinking when you brought up the light, I was thinking the same thing about his portraits, but I was thinking the same thing about your sculptures. If you don't have the proper lighting, you don't see the art. And that seems to me to be true of every piece of art I've ever seen. You can go into a museum or a gallery, and you notice immediately if the light is not fixed in a certain way, you just miss the essence of the art. But don't you find, I don't know where you work.
Well, you've talked about that, Susan. We've talked about that. And
where do you work? Do you work with natural light? Or?
I will have to tell you that with these portraits, I work all day and all night. Different times, not all at once. I can't work all at once. But because weird things happen, so I can be working on it for several hours in natural light, and then, as the night comes and I turn on lights and I walk in the room and I think, oh, this is not even close. Just not even close. So it's really interesting that in order to be able to make them work, I have to watch them. It takes weeks of watching them day and night, and then I take them all over the house. I take them for rides.
But we've talked about that and the quality of light, and you're aware of the light because that's how you sculpt the face. Instead of actually with the light, but with the lights and the darks and the shadows and all that is the same thing as what I do with light. You're creating it with the piece.
Yeah. Well, one thing that's really crazy is I take photographs first. I walk around the person, so I have to have the back as well as the front and how their neck works. But then I ask for photographs from their childhood, which is amazing how things continue throughout life, little gestures or things with the mouth or whatever. So I'm working with a whole lot of two-dimensional photographs to make something three-dimensional. And one of the issues is that nobody can hold a smile or look long enough, to have it look natural.
Right.
But you can do that. But as I'm walking around, so to make something three-dimensional, they're not going to look exactly like the person because I don't have, it's not like one of those 3D printed, computer-generated images because I'm just fooling around trying to make it work.
Right.
But anyway, I think this was so great to have somebody from the audience ask questions that maybe we should do some more of that. You want to, anybody else
have questions?
It helped me a lot. I know it would, Jerry, if you'd, but if you won't, we'll just talk and talk, and then you finally just drive you crazy. You'll have to
But I was fascinated last week. You were telling me, because we were talking about some of this, and I asked you how you learned to sculpt. And did you have a background in sculpting? And you were telling me about the education you got and how it was different, that you were an art history major, not as we think of now as a studio major, right? Right. Well, that was because I went to a women's college from 1960 to 1964, and they did not think that women would be artists, and so they did not have a studio art degree. So you were expected to learn art history if you were interested in, if that was going to be your major. And I suppose that was so that you could be charming at a cocktail party or something. I don't know why. But it was a great education because it was taught by a couple of older men who, at least they probably weren't as much older as I thought they were when I was 20. But at any rate, they had a foot in the past, and they believed in connoisseurship and teaching you how to do everything you studied that had been done by somebody else. So we made frescoes, did egg temperas, we built our own frames, we stretched our own canvas, we made gesso according to Cennini of the 15th century, we made plaster cast, and so everything was taught according to art history, which gave me the possibility to do whatever I wanted to. You really got that basis and materials, and without it actually being a studio class. But I was kind of backward for a long time. For all those people who'd gone to the College of Art or the University of Georgia, they were all already into a much more modern, contemporary sensibility. So that's been something I've had to kind of fight, is that I've always kind of had kind of an old-fashioned sensibility about art. Right. Well, I think a lot of art, though, you can learn all the technique you want, but if you don't have the passion for what you're doing and the desire, then I think that probably shows. I think that goes back to the wonder. I mean, it is a wonder. I mean, why do we do this, Jerry? It really is amazing. And Maurice has a question.
Yeah, Susan. Your sculptures are so amazing and wonderful, given your title there. But just give me a feedback on what was happening in you when you were going from your drawings into that, because I know that was a big deal, actually. If you see what I'm saying. Well, I think so, because my drawings were always very meticulous and meditative and time-consuming, and they were philosophical, and they required me to go very deep inside myself to make them. And when after this request from Jane Bickerton to do the family portrait, right after that, there was going to be a group show at the Swan Coach House of women artists, and
I said, but I don't want to sell these drawings. At that time, I was kind of building a body of work. And they said, well, you got to sell because we got to pay for the air conditioning and the lights. So you got to give us something we can sell. So that's when I made David Heath. I had just taken some photographs of him, and there were a bunch of photographs, and they were sitting on my studio table, and I thought, you know, I'll just make David Heath. And so I did. I had somebody given us one of those Christmas presents that had a rosé, a white, and a red wine in a small box, which you can see over there is the box. And so I just started working on it. And Maurice, it was so much fun, and I had such a good time doing it. And it was so different from the drawings that it was more relaxed. And then it got some notice. And you know who, this is really amazing because I didn't remember this until this year when I was going through some papers. Tina Dunkley wrote about that show and gave me in 1987 notice that it said Susan Cofer is pushing at her boundaries. I said, well, la-di-da. And so that, then after that, I got the commission to do the Goldsteins. And so then I just started doing them. And some of them are commissions, and some of them are just for fun. I just do them because they're fun. So
That's a perfect justification for almost anything.
I had a wonderful time doing you, I must say.
You know, I was around peripherally when you were doing or after you did the Einstein. And
That's right.
Was that Barnsley, the mathematician that was?
That's right. That was the second time we brought him back out. Remember, but he had been at the table many years before that particular night when we had a second go round. Okay, other questions? Yes, Mary Ann. The sequence. Well, the catalog has them in chronological order, but I will tell you. So David Heath was the first one of this people related to Atlanta arts. And from him came the commission to do Elliot and Harriet Goldstein for their wedding anniversary. And they had been patrons of the arts and collectors. And anybody who's in the art selling business can tell you right now that it's not much better than it was, that there are not a whole lot of Atlanta collectors. And so we have to treasure everyone we have ever met. And they were great. They were really wonderful people. And then I did, Sue and Jerry are probably somewhere. Now, granted, I'm also doing there are other things. Like right now at the Bascom, there are 2 portraits that are not related to Atlanta arts. And there's some other portraits in New York that were done during this time too. But then Jerry, I think, was one of the earlier ones. And then I guess I did Ruth. No, I did you first, and then Ruth, or was it the other way around? Anyway, about the same time, Mary Ann, yeah, somewhere in. And then I've done quite a few since then. So.
But this is just a small sampling of the large body that you've done.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Of portraits. These portraits are only Atlanta people, and they're, with the exception of Gary Radke, but Gary Radke gets included because he brought all that wonderful Italian art, Renaissance art, to Atlanta, and I'm grateful for that. But no, the whole point of the show is that I just want everyone to know that these people have made the biggest difference in this city. And those of you who are here, like Marianne and Maurice and Annette and Tina, the city would not be what it is in the arts if these people had not been willing to make art and collect art and protect art and teach art and do the things. Well, there's Kevin back there, and he was getting these high school kids and teaching them about art and making them love art and using art as a way to help them better themselves in life. I mean, and Tina, when I discovered what Tina had done for Atlanta by getting this art collection out at Clark Atlanta out of the basement and into a beautiful space. I mean, if you hadn't been out to Clark Atlanta, you just got to go. And it wouldn't be there if it wasn't for Tina Dunkley. So the wonder of it all is whatever it was. And Carolyn Vigtel's husband, my word, when somebody, forgive me for saying this, was at the head of the art department at Georgia State, had never heard of Goodman Vigtel. I said, you got to be kidding. You got to know about this man, because we wouldn't have the museum that we have if it hadn't been for him. And so this is my tribute to these people with all my heart. And anyway, that's enough for me. Sorry.
Well, I don't know if I knew a lot of the people. I didn't know it was before I actually got into the art side of the world, again, as I was a commercial photographer. But it's been nice, the response that I've gotten from the work. Most of the artists that I've photographed have probably been photographed before. But as far as I know, and from what I've been told, there's nobody else that has spent the amount of years. A lot of people have documented Southern writers. There's so many Southern writers, but nobody has done a volume of Southern visual artists. And as I said, I'm probably close to 200 now. I just shot a few recently. I have 4 or 5 on the docket coming up. And hopefully, at some point, there'll be another book with another 100, and it'll be something that, as you said, you know, it's a tribute to all the people that were here and have persevered and followed their desires. And
well, let me just say one more thing about these fabulous people. Annette had the idea for bringing the artwork and pairing it with the portraits, and she gave very careful hanging of all of this, which is a tribute to the artist and to the photographer of the artist. And I think it's just beautiful. But Annette, when I came to her with this idea for having this show, she was very enthusiastic and didn't tell me to go find someplace else. She liked the idea even before it expanded to what it was. It was just going to be these portraits. And when I was doing her portrait, I began to realize just what she has done for all of us artists in the city, I mean, in the state, that she has made a place where art is protected, collected, protected, and archival information about the artist. And you know, this is amazing. It's amazing we have this resource in Atlanta. So we've got Clark Atlanta, we've got MOCA, we've got the High Museum, and we wouldn't have any of these things if we didn't have these people behind them. And so that's what I wanted to do, was to show you these wonderful people. Okay.
Oh, well said.